You know, every now and then you come across a prediction online that's so detailed, so confident, it just makes you stop and think. Well, today we're going to break one of those down. A prophecy about an imminent storm of storms. We're going to follow the logic piece by piece, from a personal vision all the way to biblical codes, to understand exactly how this conclusion was reached. Now, to the person behind this prophecy, that's not just some cool line from a movie. He actually believes quotes like this are a form of what he calls predictive programming, little clues seeded in our culture to get us ready for a real catastrophic event that he says is laid out in Scripture. So, okay, how do you get from a general sense of unease to this, a specific imminent disaster? It all starts with a key idea that the speaker came up with himself. All right, so to really get our heads around this, we've got to start with a term you're probably not going to find anywhere else: Sodom 2.0. This is the speaker's personal shorthand for an event he believes is coming, a literal, modern-day repeat of the biblical destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So where does an idea like Sodom 2.0 even begin? You might think it starts with, some ancient text or complex data analysis, but nope. The whole foundation for this prophecy is something way more personal, a really intense vision. And the speaker, he pins this vision to a very, very specific moment in time. He says it all went down on October 21st, 2021. He was celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, sleeping in a tent in his garden when this happened. He describes it as feeling so incredibly real he couldn't tell if he was in the body or out of the body. So in this vision, he recounts being physically lifted up into the air, watching his own house just disappear below him. He says he was then flown to what looked like a small African village where he heard a woman scream. And then he was set down in an open field where a man he knew, instantly, was Jesus, walked up to him and just placed a hand on his head without saying a single word. Okay, so you've got this powerful but totally silent vision. How in the world does that lead to a specific date on the calendar for this storm? Well, this is where things shift from this personal experience into some really unique math involving the calendar itself. And the key to all of this, the whole timing argument, hinges on a disagreement with the standard Hebrew calendar. The speaker claims it's off by a whole month. According to his own calculations, what he calls the true biblical calendar, the time of his recording fell within the 7th month, a period packed with major biblical feasts like the Feast of Tabernacles. So then, he takes his custom calendar and basically works backward to figure out when the original Sodom and Gomorrah destruction happened. He links it to the conception of Isaac, plugs in a 9.5-month pregnancy, and his math lands the event right in that same 7th month. For him, this isn't just a coincidence, it's a pattern, a sign that history is about to repeat itself, right now. All right, so we've had the personal vision, we've had the calendar math. Now we get to the text. This is where the speaker claims to have found the actual biblical proof that this is all going to happen again. So get this, the entire scriptural argument for Sodom 2.0 boils down to one single chapter in the Bible. The speaker says he had this hunch for years that something like this was coming, but finding this specific passage, he says it was like a massive revelation that turned his feeling into what he considers solid proof. So his interpretation of this chapter is pretty unique. He doesn't see it as just some old historical document. The way he reads it, it's a living covenant made not just with the people who were there at the time, but also with those not here this day. In other words, us, future generations. It's a direct warning, he says, about plagues that a later generation is going to witness firsthand. And then we get to the verse that he presents as, well, the smoke and gun. The passage talks about a future generation seeing the land turned to, quote, brimstone and salt and burning. And then it explicitly says, like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this right here, this is the absolute heart of his entire argument. He's not reading this as Moses just using an old story as an example. No way. He sees it as a direct, literal prophecy of a second destruction event that will mirror the first one, and he believes it's going to happen in the modern land of Israel. But wait, it doesn't stop with Israel. The speaker actually expands the scope of this prophecy, identifying other modern nations he believes are targets by decoding their identities through the names of ancient tribes. To do this, he brings in another chapter, Isaiah 28. He reads this as a parallel prophecy, a warning aimed at two very specific groups, which he identifies as the ancient tribes of Ephraim and Judah. And here's how he decodes those ancient names for today. For him, Ephraim, well, that's the USA, Canada, and their allies. And he believes they're facing a destroying storm. Then there's Judah, who he identifies as the leadership in Jerusalem, prophesied to face what's called an overflowing scourge. And to really lock in his argument, he connects all of this from the Old Testament directly to what Jesus says in the New Testament. He points to this passage in Luke, arguing that Jesus himself set the precedent. The future is going to look exactly like the days of Lot, complete with fire and brimstone from the sky. Okay, so we've got the what, the storm, we've got the when, the timing, and we've got the who, the targets. But what about the why? Well, according to the speaker, this prophesied destruction isn't random at all. It has a very specific goal. Well, according to his argument, this whole cataclysmic event has one single overriding purpose: to bring back the fear of the Lord. He makes the case that the world, and especially the modern church, has forgotten God's power. This storm is meant to be a severe wake-up call. And to really drive home just how intense this would be, he references another passage from Luke, one that predicts an event so terrifying that men's hearts will fail them for fear. So this isn't just a bad storm in his view. It's a reality-shattering event designed to force a massive spiritual reset. So, let's just pull all these threads together for a second. The argument kicks off with a personal vision. The timing gets locked in with a custom calendar. The proof is found in a very literal reading of one specific chapter of the Bible. And the whole point of this coming Sodom 2.0, it's a terrifying warning meant to make the world fear God again. And so what we're left with is this really complete, almost self-contained prophecy. It has a supernatural origin, a unique mathematical system, and a crystal clear purpose. It kind of leaves us with a bigger question to chew on, doesn't it? What does the careful construction of a prophecy like this tell us about our own deep-seated need for answers, for certainty, especially when the world feels so chaotic?